Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome back to episode 2 with Sarah Baila Teleshevsky, all the way from Melbourne, Australia. And we are continuing last week's episode, so go back and listen if you haven't yet. We are talking about her journey from being an intense child, a difficult child, to then having 9 of them, and all the while being in education and trying to and gravitating towards those more intense and difficult children and trying to find that answer. And we left off talking about that Honda and Ferrari idea, the head and heart child, and how the nurtured heart approach really gave you this understanding of the missing link. So maybe in one or two sentences, recap what that missing link was and what that new understanding was for you about these kids when you learned the nurtured heart approach.
So just recapping from the last thing I said last time, after food, clothing, and shelter, kids' 2 basic needs are not love and discipline, although you would think that, and they're probably way up there too, but approval and relationship. And most kids don't get enough of either. And when they do, they get them in interesting ways. We talked about head kids and heart kids, Hondas and Ferraris. The head kids are the Hondas, in case you haven't made that connection yet. And the heart kids are the Ferraris. And the reason I call them head kids and heart kids is because head kids actually think about what they're doing sometimes, while heart kids are very they interact with energy. So that, it's their hearts that motivate them to do things that they do, and they don't really think about consequences. We know that if we've ever parented or taught a difficult child, consequences don't really work because they don't exist until they're on top of them. And then they just say, failure, failure, failure. I'm always failing. I'm a bad kid. So consequences don't really work. They don't really work. They sometimes work for head kids or Hondas, but they don't work for Ferraris because they don't speak the right language. So let's talk about our Ferraris. We've got a classroom full of kids, or a house, but I've been there, done that with both. But whichever, just translate for yourself, whatever it is. And you've got a kid who's not actually breaking any rules right now, and he's, you'd think, okay, it's natural. Why should they break a rule? You have to think about breaking a rule, and that might possibly be true with a head kid. If they want to break a rule, it's because they make a decision. I want a bit of action. But a heart kid naturally breaks rules. They have to think about behaving. They have to be motivated to behave because they are wired to need relationship more than approval. Now, unfortunately, these kids need approval just as much as the head kids, but they're not going to get it. So they have to make do with the relationship. And by the way, the head kids often don't get enough relationship. They might get low-grade approval on a regular basis, but not like out-of-the-box approval. And they certainly don't get enough relationship a lot of the time. So both kinds of kids are missing out to some degree. But the real losers are your heart kids, because they can't get their energy needs met unless they're breaking a rule. And they can't help breaking the rule because they as long as they're behaving, no one's noticing them. And they are like sitting in the room looking at that bottle of alcohol. And it's so easy to go and get that alcohol and take it. But they don't want to break the rule. If the rule is don't annoy your brothers and sisters, or don't annoy mum, or sit still, or stay at the table, or whatever the rule is, get into the bath, get into bed, whatever it is. They're sitting there and thinking it's so easy to get the relationship. Now, of course, it's not going on in their head. Their head is, I don't know where their head is, but their heart is craving to do something wrong, and they are holding back, and nobody's noticing. So what happens? After a while, one of two things will happen. Either they'll get just enough relationship to keep them going for another little while, or they're going to break a rule. And if they break a minor rule, they'll get a minor relationship, and that'll only whet their appetite for more. If they break a major rule, they're going to get a big dose of relationship. Might come in the form of severe punishment, might come in the form of being grounded, which is awesome because then they've got something to fight about and to resist. It might be about having privileges taken away, which is also an awesome opportunity for relationship. Or it may be something else. Either way, the kid loses out on many different fronts. The first front is that they lost their privilege and it wasn't their fault. The second one is they got relationship over all the wrong things. When they were doing the right thing, nobody noticed. And the third one, which is the most critical, in my opinion, is that they say, I'm a bad kid, I'm a failure, I never can get it together. And they really, really grow up believing there's something terribly wrong with them. I'm a rotten kid. I never do the right thing. They don't say I was doing the right thing for 3 hours and nobody noticed, or for a half an hour and nobody noticed. They say I never do the right thing, I never get it right. And they even compare themselves in a way to other kids like I did when I was a kid. Why is it that my classmates do better than me at school while I'm just as smart as them? And I did know I was smart. I thought I was smart anyway. I wasn't 100% sure. Anyway, so there you've got the fact that if you figure out a way, which Howard has done for us, thank you, how to give a kid approval and relationship at the same time, and not the toxic kind that makes them feel like they're a failure and they're bad, but they have the nutritious kind, what we call emotional nutrition, where they see themselves as a kid who's worthy and full of qualities. And when we combine those two things, we're not just helping our Ferraris, we're making life completely different for our Hondas as well, to the extent that when a kid leaves school, after 18 years of, for some kids, torture, funny thing happens. A lot of our Ferraris actually feel liberated and can actually start living, while many of our Hondas end up in therapy because they realize that whatever they did over the last 18 years was to satisfy somebody else's needs, teachers, parents, schools. And that was a big epiphany for me. So since 2009, I've been coaching parents and teachers and schools to look at life this way and to see how much sense it actually makes.
This needs, guys, we need to listen to this many times. This is so, foundationally shifting to this epiphany that you're talking about, this understanding of these two different types of kids, and wow, do I know both, and wow, do I get both, and see that. And it's so, everything you're saying about the thinking about the head kids, thinking about it and making those conscious choices and choosing approval over relationship, and then coming out of school and being like left with nothing and shattered. And then that Ferrari or that heart kid who just, while you were talking, I got emotional because my kids are all a bunch of Ferraris. And so there's no thought, there's no holding back. It's just this abundant like light, and it's so beautiful. And yet visualizing a classroom, or like in the last episode when you were describing your family, and I'm seeing, 9, that's your family, or maybe in a classroom you have 22 or 25, whatever, and they're sitting in these desks, and here's the teacher. But if I'm visualizing these Ferraris, it's just this energy and light that's like bursting out of these desks and like just like swirling, and like I hear that. I hear the struggle. I hear the pain of the teachers and the just desperation of loving parents and loving teachers who want everything for these kids, but there's no way. There's just way too much chaos. There's just way too much swirling energy, and there's just, what do you do? And the way that you just broke it down and brought in this shift, where if we're looking for relationship, and that's what's motivating, and that's what's pulling me forward, and that's the driving force, and that's what I need. And then with the Nurtured Heart framework, where I'm so clearly showing children in the language they speak, and we're so clear that, wow, I see you, and you are so valuable, and your light is just incredible, and come, we want you here, we want you here, we want you.
So how do we reach these kids? They already think they're failures. If you've got a kid who's bullying other kids, he probably didn't label himself a bully before he was 2. And he never questioned that label. How did it happen? Because every time he went near the baby, his mother would say, be careful the baby. Why? Because he wasn't careful. He was a Ferrari. She never had to say that to the Honda. But because she kept saying, be careful the baby, he or she grew up thinking, well, I'm not responsible, and I'm rough, and I'm not, mummy can't rely on me. So the next step from that is by the time they're 3, they are bullies and they are picking on the baby, or even by the time they're 2. So they grow up thinking they're bullies, or thinking they're incompetent, or thinking they're clumsy, or thinking they're stupid, or whatever it is. And it's only because the information they got, which gave them that label, they got the information before they were too young to question it. So within their first or second year of life. So the only way we're going to change their perception of who they are is by giving them concrete evidence of who they are when things are not going wrong. So we have to, like you say, don't energize negative behaviors, but that's only going to work if we are very determined to notice, even very low key, and even without eye contact, which is very important for some kids, noticing when they're actually not breaking rules, noticing when they're not doing anything wrong. Even if you just happen to say to them, I see you're thinking about that, your next move on the computer game. Or I see that you're interested in your book. Or as I used to do, and I would demonstrate in preschools, I see that you were riding your bike and didn't hit that little child, which I used a lot for kids who were bullying. Now, of course, they're not going to hit the little child, but that doesn't matter. The fact is, you want to point out to them when they're being careful, because otherwise they won't notice. You got to point out to them, you climbed up the climbing frame and you were careful not to step on her fingers, which I have actually used. And they're fantastic because the child starts to see them in a different light. I'm not a bully. I'm not aggressive. I'm not inattentive. I'm not irresponsible, etc., etc. So I'm not clumsy. I'm not stupid. How do they learn that they're not stupid? By pointing out to them what they're doing right. And without that, you cannot give them attention for doing the wrong thing, but they're still not going to get their energy needs met. So they're still not going to know how to transform because they're not giving any positive guidance. So they still haven't tasted the alcohol, or they've tasted it just enough to want more, and they're not getting any more. So we've got to make sure that there's plenty of stuff we're noticing, even if it's not groundbreaking or earth-shattering. And if you're worried about the other kids in the family or in the classroom, so give it to them too. It's not going to hurt them. It's only going to benefit. Start noticing all the things that go right in the house. Start noticing all the things, even for yourself. I really didn't feel like making dinner tonight, but I did. I pushed myself and I made a pot of pasta. Instead of, I'm so lazy, all I could do is come up with was pasta. So turn it around. See the light in it. Or your husband didn't leave his underwear on the floor. So it's just very casually, thanks for picking up your underwear. And if he turns around and says, what? It's okay. I say, oh, sorry. Just change the subject. But he got it anyway. Start giving thanks for that. Start giving yourself credit for all the tiny things you do all the time. You didn't throw the hairbrush at her. You didn't slam down the dish and break it. That took self-control. Acknowledge it. I was really mad and I didn't do anything. I didn't do what I wanted to do. And then again, I did do what I didn't want to do. I gave my kid a kiss even though I was angry with her. Okay, I didn't feel it and she knows I didn't feel it, but so what? I gave her a kiss anyway. So whatever it is, first start wearing those rose-colored glasses. They're very important.
There's so much simplicity to this, and also it's so profound and not simple at the same time, because what you're saying about rewiring how they see themselves and rewriting this, what we call the portfolio, their view, their self-view and self-concept, is another layer of doing the same thing, of showing them where the relationship is available and drawing them into this truer sense of themselves, like this truer truth of the greatness that they were created to be and are already.
Mm-hmm.
So it's multifaceted. It's we're guiding them towards the relationship that they're seeking, and while doing that, teaching them so much about themselves
Exactly.
in the positive way and growing them so deeply. And the interesting thing is you started off by saying that what kids are looking for the most is this approval and this
Relationship.
relationship. And we started off by describing that what's going wrong is within the relationship, but even there, the approval still doesn't cut it. It's still lame, the approval. You have to do something really amazing to get really big approval. I mean, the regular kid who's sitting in class and doing the right thing isn't getting such major approval either. At
They're
least,
not getting
like you
enough
said,
at all.
not at all. But here, we're changing the dynamic. We're going after the Ferraris. We're going after the relationship. We're showing them where it's available in a what we call right side up way, and then we're also giving that approval.
And the best part about it is that the Hondas are the biggest winners, because they're actually noticed for the things that they do automatically. We have now made the focus of our classroom or our home positive choices and worthy choices. You know, our kids are going to be aligned to make good choices, because that's what's important in our lives. It's not the grades they're getting, or how still they're sitting, or how quiet they are, or whether they remember to raise their hand. Of course, that's important. But what's more important is they're recognized for just being human, but being worthy human beings. Not only not stepping on someone else's toes, but reframing that not only you didn't bother anybody, but you're being respectful. How are you being respectful? Because you're not bothering anybody. You're being respectful right now because you can do your work and focus better, and so can everybody else. Thank you so much. So suddenly this kid who's always been a troublemaker is now a hero. But I want to tell you what really got me going with Nurtured Heart Approach, because I think there are two little stories which pushed me to go and do the training the first time around. They were both obviously before I trained. I just finished reading the book. I had a reputation for working on difficult kids, as I said. My friends knew me as such, and my parents from the school, even though the school was already closed down, but they knew me as someone who related to kids. And then I had all these extra skills as well, which I hadn't had back then, which I learned from the book Transforming the Difficult Child. So two things happened within a friend of mine's husband called me up out of the blue. Oh, hi, Sam. How are you? What's doing? I hadn't heard from him in a while. I was wondering why he's calling me. And he starts chatting about this and that and the other. Finally, he says, do me a favor, call my wife and just say hello to her, give her a call, and find some excuse to call her. And the bottom line was, he started telling me what was going on in their house. He says, she'll tell you everything, but she's too broken to reach out to you. So it turns out they had a 13-year-old boy. We'll call him Mark. And this Mark was a tiny little kid who was absolutely out of control. He was running around the streets at night. He was roaming the streets with very unsavory people. He was in trouble with the law. 13 years old, a little tiny kid, but he was a monster. And he was violent at home, to the extent that his mother was afraid of him, and she was afraid for his younger sister that he'd actually hurt her badly. And she started telling me bit by bit what was going on in her house. And I didn't have any program. All I had was the book to go on, but I created a program for her. And I called her every day, and we talked every day for half an hour or an hour, whatever it took. And I got her to a stage that she wasn't afraid of him. And we just worked with her that she would find every tiny little thing that he wasn't doing wrong and just lather him and lather him and lather him. And he was, after a few days, he started softening. I'm telling you the truth. She had a court order against this boy. He wasn't allowed to come near the house. She called the police a week later. She said, I want to lift the court order. They said, it's not so simple. And it wasn't, but she managed to. She said, the crux, the highlight of the first 3 weeks, which were incredibly difficult was that once he was running down the stairs and he fell and he twisted his ankle. He didn't hurt himself badly. And he's going, ah, ah, ah. And she just screams out completely like out of the blue, my gosh, you hurt yourself. Swear. Swear. And they both just roared laughing. It was the only thing she could grab onto. And I mean, he's an adult now. This was in 2009 or 10. So he's an adult now. He's a gorgeous, gorgeous adult. In fact, he does incredible stuff. He fights for justice and he fights for all kinds of things. And he's an organizer. He's a real ADHD Ferrari, full on Ferrari. But she's had nothing but nachas from him, joy and satisfaction from him since then. The other one was a kid who was in our school. He'd come at age 13 after being bullied by all kinds of different people and abused by his father. And his mother had just got the guts up to leave her father and change cities. And he'd been a mess to the extent that when he'd come to my school, which was the most, welcoming, easy place to go to, he would walk up and down outside the front for half an hour before he actually had the guts to knock on the door. So he was in my school for a year and he made a complete turnaround. He came at age 13. I met up with his mum a couple of years later, like I said. It was also about 2009 or 2010. And I said, how's things going? I hadn't seen her in 3 or 4 years. She says, can we go for coffee one day? I said, yeah. We went for coffee and she starts telling him about this boy. He was doing his last year of school. He wasn't coping. In fact, he was on the spectrum and he wasn't coping. He was a very big kid, not like this other kid who was a little schnook. This guy was a big kid and he was 17 years old. And he was frightening and violent. He wasn't coping with the stress of the last year of school with the external exams and everything, and he was a mess. So I did the same thing with the mum. I sort of created a program for her and was in touch with her every day or two. They were around about the same time, but this was the second incident, maybe a month or two later. And this kid also made a complete turnaround. So with those two stories, I became so hooked on, besides all the theory, which made so much sense.
Okay, thank you so much for everything you shared with us, Sarah Baila. And guess what, folks? We're going to have another episode coming up in the next few weeks with more stories of the amazing transformation that Sarah Baila has created, been a steward for, brought about in this world for so many people. So that's exciting. I know I have so many nuggets I'm taking away from here. So show us your book and tell us what it is. And then we'll close out.
Okay, so here's the book. Serve. It's called Born to Serve. And it's my grandson, one of my grandchildren when he was little. And it's basically my education philosophy and a roadmap for a blessed life, both personally and in our families and in our workplaces and in life in general. We were all put on this planet for a purpose. And the purpose was not just to get whatever I can and stay out of trouble. I mean, that's a nice start. It's a very nice start. But actually, God needs us here. And we all have a job to do. And what I did was I wrote a book on my thoughts on that. And of course, a lot on education, which I'm sure some of you will disagree vehemently, which is great. I love when people disagree. As you know, I love difficult kids and I love people who disagree. But it's definitely a conversation piece and I recommend it. So that's my book.
So check the link below for the link to her book, Born to Serve. And if people want to reach out to you, and how can they do that and what could they expect? What do you offer?
Okay, so the best way to reach me is actually WhatsApp. So I will give you, Mussi, my WhatsApp contact, and you will use it with discretion.
Okay, so if you want to reach Sarah Baila, reach out to me. I'll be the
I hope you don't mind that.
conduit, no problem. And you can leave a comment on on this episode, or you can reach out to me at energizinghearts@gmail.com, and I will forward your request to Sarah Baila. So you may have to just travel to Melbourne and knock on her door. So you might be getting some visitors. All righty.
Okay.
All the best, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening.